So, David Bicknell, Chief Winemaker, Oakridge Wines in the Yarra Valley. Welcome to The Real Review, and great to have you aboard, and congratulations on Oakridge being one of our top wineries of 2022 in Australia.
Thanks, Huon. Always nice to be recognised.
Good to see you there, and that the beard is getting more luxuriant every time I see you.
Well, it sort of feels like vintage hasn't stopped. So I was clean shaven with a number one all over at the start of vintage. So this is just the vintage crop, and I haven't quite got to modify it and do all the a bit like with winemaking, to do all the finessing at the end of the season.
Which brings me to the to your wine I've got here is the Hink Chardonnay 2020, and of course it's a cliche that good wine begins in the vineyard, and I guess you, amongst many others, celebrate the grower with your grower series of Chardonnays, Pinots and other wines. And the Hink is, I'm not familiar with the location of the Hink, but it seems to me that it's a pretty consistent vineyard in quality terms.
Yeah, it really is a fantastic site, and you will know quite well about Lusatia Park, which De Bortoli own now. And at one stage we were taking, more than half that vineyard. In fact, we tried to buy it. It's basically a cricket ball's throw from Lusatia Park, and in many ways, well, there are some similarities, but it's a slightly larger property, and it's actually got a few different aspects that we're working with as well. So I actually think it's a better vineyard site in many ways because it's a little less exposed, and we do have those other sites that we can work with. So we've actually in the last couple of years more Chardonnay on that property on the south side with some different clones. So that'll be really interesting what happens with that. So it's a really fantastic vineyard, and if we could, we would get Hank to plant more, and the longer we have Hank, I think the better the wines are going to become.
But it does seem to me that that this wine is very much an Oakridge wine, very much a Bicknell style wine. It's very delicate, restrained, lots of lemon and cashew, very fine wine, very subtle wine. And I think you withhold the malolactic in pretty much all of what you make. And that seems to give me that streamlined, incisive precision that you seem to have in your wines.
Yeah, I think, we don't talk a lot about house style that much, but obviously it's become a very important part of what we do and has become highly recognisable. And I mean, I see that as being a virtue, and it's something that we've really tried to come to grips with the reds that we produce as well, that there is a distinct house style that accompanies them. And, it's all work in progress. And really how it happened was just the application of logic, I think, is what you would describe it as, where, when I recall what we were doing back in the early 90s, and we were throwing everything at Chardonnay and, settling it and enzyme treating and then racking lees back in and putting stuff through Malo, partial Malo, and so forth. And we were just, kind of mucking around with it too much and making Frankenstein wines. They're all just like body parts stitched together, and they didn't really have any continuity about them. And it was that sort of deconstruction when, I came to Oakridge and everything at one point had been going in together, that we split the vineyards up, and of course, lo and behold, some vineyards were better than others, and I took a very, Protestant approach to the winemaking. I've kept it very simple. What can we leave out rather than what do we put in? I think that's, one of the famous Tim Napstein quotes. It's not what you put in, it's what you leave out that makes the really great wines. And we took that approach, and I guess it's all been about refining the process ever since. And what we found is that at moderate sugar levels with physiologically flavour ripe fruit, we had wonderfully balanced acidities that made wines that were really shapely, that we didn't have to do a lot of work to them. And that's still the case. I mean, all of these vineyard Chardonnays that we've been putting out, the only additive is sulfur dioxide. To me, that's a good thing. That's a really positive thing. It makes me feel good about myself.
Well, can I jump in there and just on the coattails of that Malo discussion? I remember John Middleton. He was the first person I heard saying, why Australian winemakers picking their Chardonnay too ripe, putting it through a malolactic fermentation and then adding buckets of acid to correct it at the end of it? It's madness. And of course, you and many others moved well away from that a long time ago. And then discovered, it seems to me, that when you pick the grapes early, you don't actually lack flavour. You actually end up with more positives than negatives.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing, and I've had this discussion with a few people recently about flavour in the vineyard versus flavour in wine, and what I say to them is, if you want to go to Sydney, you get off at Redfern. You walk the last couple of stations, because that's what happens in the fermentation process. That what you pick and what you taste develops into something that's just along the line a little bit further. And I think there's an obsession with numbers in the industry, and I think that comes through what we're taught at winemaking school, that you've got to hit certain target numbers, and that's not necessarily real. And I think for maybe the commercial end of the winemaking world, it is, but in fine wine, it's not. It's about flavour. It's about appropriate phenolic material, tannin in red wines and so forth. And there's been plenty of wines that we've picked that people have been surprised we've been picking so early, but they've made really beautiful balanced wines. And if you think about a lot of those wines that were made, back in the 70s, 80s, and perhaps into the 90s in the Yarra Valley, a lot of them were 11.5 to 12.5% alcohol. And it's those wines with moderate alcohol and good acidity. And as long as the phenolic material is ripe and their flavour ripe, then they make beautiful balanced wines. And that's the concept that we really try and achieve here. Table wines, in the true sense of what that means. They work at the table with food. They don't fight with it.
David Bicknell, thank you very much for your time from Oakridge Wines in the Yarra Valley, one of the Real Review's top wineries of Australia for 2022. Good to see you, David, and congratulations. Hope to see you at at least one of the exhibitions, and your very good health.
Thanks, Huon.